Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, co-editor-in-chief of Retail Insider. Joining me today is Todd Hirsch, who is a speaker, author, and economist based in Calgary. Thanks, Todd, for joining us today.
Great to be here, Mario.
Hey, we're going to talk about the retail sector, but more importantly, consumers. And I'm wondering, how would you describe the financial health of the average Canadian consumer these days?
I would call it lackluster.
Yeah.
It's not a disaster, but it's also not really great. When I look at retail sales numbers over the last year, they're essentially flat. They were up about 1.5% from a year ago, and that is adjusting for inflation. But if you take population growth, it's basically each person is spending about the same amount they were spending a year ago. So it hasn't collapsed despite all the doom and gloom in the world, but it also is not really increasing. It's just flat.
Okay, and tell me just a little bit about interest rates and where we're at with interest rates and what impact that is having on Canadian consumers.
Well, interest rates have come down in 2025, and the Bank of Canada, I think the last couple of times, they've stayed steady with rates at 2.25%, which, of course, is not the rate of interest that consumers pay, but it influences all of those borrowing rates. So we're back down to a fairly favorable interest rate environment. The Bank of Canada is signaling at this point it feels on balance things are where they'd like it. So I'm not expecting a lot of changes to the Bank of Canada's interest rate policies, at least until probably summer. And even then, we'll see where the world is at.
Okay. Now, help me out with this because I see so many studies and reports out all the time and surveys, right? And on balance, I get one side of the equation where consumers are stressed and they're only like $200 away from catastrophe. And then I get on the other side of things where people and showing resilience in their spending. What do you make of all this? What is the data really telling us?
It's a great question. And it sort of comes down to something I was writing about in my LinkedIn post this week. Economists get into trouble sometimes when we talk about the average. So we talk about
Yeah.
average inflation or we talk about average, consumer spending, but that really masks the fact that, for example, some Canadians' income has been going up quite nicely over the last couple of years, even through COVID. They're
Mm.
probably spending quite nicely. On the other hand, a lot of other Canadians have seen zero or maybe even negative income growth over the last little while. And they're the ones that are really facing some strain, really facing some, they're $200 away from
Yeah.
insolvency and, living absolutely paycheck to paycheck. So there are two groups of people. And then, of course, everyone in between. So we always have to be careful when we talk about the average because it masks I think, a lot of struggle that a lot of Canadian households are having.
Okay. Now, when you look at the level of spending, and and again, I see a lot of data, and a lot of data shows how much in debt Canadians are. How much longer do you think Canadians can sustain this level of current spending?
Well, again, it really depends on that individual Canadian. Some will be able to manage nice levels of debt because their income is still growing. So they're not quite as concerned about it. On the other hand, I think a growing number of Canadians are, pushing that debt wall.
Yeah.
Especially if they've racked up credit card debt, which of course comes with a much, much higher interest rate. Really hard to get out of that cycle of debt, especially if those consumers are forced, and I don't want to make them sound like they're being irresponsible, but some of them are forced to buy essentials like food and fuel for their vehicle, on credit cards. That is really not a great spot for anyone to be in. Some of them probably feel like I have to have some food on the table for my kids. So it's those Canadians that I worry about the most, the growing debt levels, because
Yeah.
they are going to find their debt levels hitting a wall soon.
Now, when you look at what's happening again with the consumers and their stress, financial stress, what do you think this means for retailers? Does it mean that the value discount type stores, whether the Dollaramas of the world, are benefiting from this? And does it mean retailers in general just have to put things on sale?
Well, I think so. And when I look at the numbers, so that overall number I was talking about earlier, overall consumer spending is up 1.5%. But when I break it down into the different categories of retail spending, that is where it gets really interesting. The number one highest category of consumer spending at an astounding 24% increase was used cars.
Ah,
Not surprisingly, the
yeah,
number one lowest or the biggest contraction in spending was new cars
yeah.
at minus 5.4%. So
Wow.
you definitely see this shift. People, I guess, feel they still need a vehicle to get around, but they are making a choice to buy a used car simply because they are going to be less money. Financing might be a little easier on a lower price point. So we do see clear evidence that consumers, if they're feeling stressed, are making some choices around what they're buying.
Yeah. Now, when you look forward in the next 6 to 12 months, what should retailers be keeping a close eye on when it comes to data and statistics to guide them in this journey?
Yeah, well, I was looking at the Bank of Canada. They have a quarterly survey of consumer expectations that is forward looking.
Yeah.
And that one just came out January 19th. So it's fairly fresh data. Consumers are feeling stressed, and they're feeling the weight of the tariffs and the trade war. So I think retailers, even though this is completely out of their control, I think they are going to want to keep a very close eye on where tariffs go in 2026. And that really is anyone's guess. Who knows what mood Donald Trump will be in on any given day?
Yeah.
I mean,
True.
this is the world we live in.
Yeah.
But those tariffs and the financial and economic condition of the country really does seem to be sort of dictating where consumers are feeling.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks so much, Todd, for joining us today.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks, Mario.
Okay, that was Todd Hirsch, an economist, speaker, and author based in Calgary. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, co-editor in chief of Retail Insider. Thanks for joining us today.